Hello everybody, my name is Rebecca Van Herweg and this is our first video presentation. Let me see. Okay, so for going back a little bit in history, I wanted to kind of give a little snippet. Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. So this is something that we were taught when we were children, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who thinks this, but a lot of the information we learned back then is a little bit hazy. But for this pretty video presentation, we had the opportunity to pick someone in history that we've learned about thus far in this class, and I thought, and at least like somebody that's made an influence to our history. So I've decided to talk about Christopher Columbus. We discussed him in the first few chapters of the book, and I wanted to kind of make a little comparison about what it was like when you were learning about him when you were a child compared to what it was like learning about him as an adult. So it seems as though when you're a kid, Christopher Columbus sounded like a hero and a great man that discovered the new world, like he did it all by himself, that type of thing. But when you get older, you understand and you're able to conceptualize the things and the information different as an adult. And you really come to figure out that Christopher Columbus didn't really discover the New World. And in fact, he was actually kind of a greedy man. So to start off with a little bit of information about him, Christopher Columbus was a Spanish navigator. He was responsible for sailing across the Atlantic Ocean from Spain and discovering the New World in 1492. He was born in 1451 in Genoa, Italy. When he was growing up and he was a teenager, he actually got his first job on a merchant ship that was at sea until about 1470. But during this time, his ship was actually attacked by pirates. But miraculously, he was able to survive this event by floating to shore on a piece of scrap wood that he found. And he floated to the shores of Libsyn. I'm probably not saying that, but I don't know. There, he would study astronomy, navigation, and mathematics for schooling. And so this is where he began to study alternative routes for new places to explore. So this is when he started thinking. Columbus was a man that focused on traveling to new places to tell his people about new routes to travel. He wanted to create a faster way for people to travel from Africa to Europe, and so by doing so, he argued to travel across the Atlantic Ocean instead of going around the African continent. And so he thought it was going to save time, it was going to be short, it was going to be easy. Unfortunately, Columbus was a greedy man, and he really only had interest in having fame and fortune. And so once he was finally given permission from the Spanish monarchy to sail across the ocean, he was promised to keep 10% of whatever he found. And he would also be granted a noble title for the land that he found, and this would be coming from the monarchy. So after they set sail for 36 days in search of Asia. This is what he thought he was going to come to first. Columbus and his crew accidentally landed in the Bahamas. And when he got there, he saw the natives that lived there and noticed the types of clothing that they had and that they actually had speckles of gold on them. And so he kind of kept this in the back of his mind, thinking that this was going to be a very profitable experience looking for gold. So after they visited there, they continued to look on their journey in Cuba. And so this is where the Santa Maria actually wrecked on a reef off the island. So 39 men actually decided to settle in this village that was there called Villa de la Navidad, or Hispaniola. It's actually called the Christmas town, believe it or not. Okay, so once Columbus returned, once he settled the men there, he decided to return to Spain to tell the king and all the monarchy about what he found. He came with these over-exaggerated stories about how great this place was and all of the riches that he saw. And later, he actually decided to return back to La Navidad. And he actually found that the village of settlers that were left there had all been murdered and their village was destroyed. So at this time, he was infuriated and enforced slavery on these natives to build this settlement. So during this time, he explored the island for gold and forced labor among these natives, which created a hatred against Columbus among them, obviously. So once he left for the second time from Hispaniola, he actually left 2 people in charge to govern the natives and keep the search out for gold. And so he promised them many wishes, and that was going to end up paying up for him. So once he returned to Spain, once he returned back to Navidad, again for the third time, he actually found out that the natives revolted against the rain. And so the monarchy figured this out, and they actually sent for Columbus's arrest. So once he was actually picked up in Navidad and actually put in shackles and returned to Spain, being stripped of his titles and his riches. And then they put a new governor in charge of Hispaniola. So he lost everything from his 3 voyages that he found. So after a while, he actually convinced the Spanish king to pay for one last mission to look for riches. But during this voyage, he actually made it all the way across the Atlantic Ocean by Panama. And at that point, natives again attacked their ships, where he was forced to flee, leaving one of his ships behind and once again returning home empty-handed. So during his first journey to the New World, there was actually a letter that Columbus wrote during this first voyage to Louis de Sant, describing his journey and his discoveries. So at first he wrote, "At every point where I landed and succeeded in talking to them, I gave them some of everything, and I had cloth and many other things without receiving anything in return. But they are hopelessly timid people. It is true that since they have gained more confidence and are losing this fear, they are so unsuspicious and so generous with what they possess that no one who had seen it would believe it. They never refuse anything that is asked for." It also continues to talk about what else he found in this journey and what the islands look like, and also about what the natives looked like during this time. He talked about like their hair and how like men had long hair, and even some of the outfits that they had on. You can just see from like the little snippet that I brought from that letter, he talks about the natives and their attitudes, and he was about to be like he was shell-shocked when he came that second time once the village was destroyed and the natives revolted. He also states in this letter, "Many other things of value will be discovered by the men I left behind me, as I stayed nowhere when the wind allowed me to pursue my voyage, except in the city of Navidad, which I left fortified and safe. Indeed, I might have accomplished much more had the crew served me as they ought to have done." But once he returned to the city of Navidad, everything was destroyed, and the settlers were murdered. And when Columbus saw this, he began demanding the natives and threatening them that if they didn't comply with their demands, he was going to ruin their lives, essentially. And so this is why the monarchy responded to the way that they did, and they took their titles away. It's because he just kept making things up. Okay, so Christopher Columbus was ultimately somebody he's always been taught to us in our history books. He's a man that struggled by constantly being shot down by his government for these alternative routes. He thought that he knew that he had like the good math calculations to think that it was a shorter route. The monarchy knew this, but he was so persistent that they decided just let him have his way and give him this opportunity to try and discover new, shorter ways to travel to the New World. So once he made it there, he ultimately failed by not bringing any riches or realistic stories of what he found. And he was never, in my own opinion, I feel like he was never able to truly make the monarchy happy. Just from everything that kept happening. Once they found out that he kept over exaggerating the truth, he was stripped of this, of his riches. So once Columbus accidentally arrived into the Bahamas, he found out they were creating their own society and cultures, but he decided that he was going to make the decisions for them. And so this was kind of a trickle effect to other Europeans that come later in the future, that they just think that they can dominate whatever land. So like I said, from the previous letters, it kind of discussed how he portrayed the natives as very timid and passive. They were so willing to do whatever they want, and that he used this to his advantage and kind of take advantage of them. So he mistreated them and manipulated them to get what he wants. From his actions, it kind of unleashed, like I said, the trickle-down effect of how the other settlers would continue to treat them, which is unfortunate for the natives. But besides the fact that he was a greedy man, and that kind of ended in a weird way for the natives, he was responsible for voyaging to the New World, which did set the path for other settlers and colonies to travel and occupy territories and expand. And because of his travels, other settlers were more willing to sail to see the future after to discover new areas. So from this, we can kind of see, and even like from our chapters and our discussions, we can see that not all settlers are as demanding or intolerant of natives. Settlers like the French, like we just read this past week, they're more willing to learn from them and expand their knowledge. They wanted to learn how to live off the land like they did. So they were willing to learn how to be friends and work together in the fur trade. But unfortunately, Columbus's aggression towards them is probably where this negative attitude starts to form with the English and Dutch settlers. So to tie it into the chapters we've discussed this week, we can see how Columbus has paved the way to have certain attitudes towards the natives. But we found that English and Dutch have a lower tolerance, and it almost seems like they just wanted it as a transactional for weapons. So they didn't want any relationship with them. They were more focused on starting families and colonies and occupying territories, and that's what they thought was the most important thing when it came to the fur trade. They didn't really want to learn how the natives hunted or how they trapped. They just wanted to focus on what they wanted to do. And so this is the opposite side of what the French colonies wanted. And the French knew that occupying territories wasn't important in regards to the fur trade. They were all single men that kind of, in my opinion, I feel like they had a mutual respect with the Indians, and they wanted to learn more about how they trapped and how they got the furs they did. Ultimately, Christopher Columbus died in 1506. He thought that he discovered the Americas, but he definitely did not. But something he did do was he sparked the exploration for other settlers to come in the future. So Columbus may have his downfalls and may have had been like a greedy or over-exaggerating man, but he is a historical figure that will continue to be taught in our history books. We're going to continue to sing songs about him. We're going to continue to teach our children that he's a great man, and once they get to college, they're going to learn not so much. But he's always going to be remembered for the achievements of at least finding new waterways to get to the New World, and he's always going to be talked about in generations to come. So yeah, I think that is all I have to say. If any of you have any questions, feel free to let me know. It was very interesting to kind of talk about it. Let's see. I want to talk about something else. I think it's kind of interesting about how Columbus's life was after he did the journeys, because I think he thought he was a big shot, and so once he had his riches taken away and he was an old man, he wasn't able to travel anymore. And so he just kind of lived the rest of his life. It wasn't very much long after his last voyage, how much time that he had, but he was able to remain governor in certain areas, except obviously in Hispaniola. but everything else was stripped from him. So all that fame and fortune that he wanted eventually got taken away. So I guess that kind of teaches us not to be a greedy person. So let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.